The hearing will come to order. I will now count down to start the meeting. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The Subcommittee on Homeland Security will come to order. After this hearing is being conducted, as this hearing is being conducted virtually, we must address a few housekeeping matters. During today's virtual hearing, members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. When you are recognized to speak, if I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you would like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. To avoid inadvertent background noise, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute participant microphones when they are not recognized to speak. If there is a technology issue during a member's speaking time, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. We will be following the 5-minute rule. With 1 minute remaining in your time, the clock will turn yellow. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red and it will be time to recognize the next member. We will follow the speaking order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member, followed by members present at the time the hearing is called to order, in order of seniority, and we will alternate by party. Next, we will go to members who were not present when the hearing was called to order until every member present has had a first round. Members can submit information in writing at any of our hearings or markups using the email address provided in advance to your staff. Let's begin. Today, I welcome Ms. Yuri Jadot, the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, who is here to discuss the fiscal year 2023 budget request for USCIS, the management of its resources and its operational priorities and challenges. Thank you for being here this morning. Director, coming into this job, you inherited massive challenges, eroding public confidence stemming from poor fiscal management and growing backlogs of applications and petitions that cause significant harm to individuals, communities, and businesses who rely on fair and timely USCIS processing and adjudication of benefits. USCIS and State Department operations also have been significantly impacted by the pandemic, further exacerbating these backlogs. While it is easy to fixate on the challenges that still face the agency, it is important to acknowledge progress that has been made. You and the Biden-Harris administration have taken many important steps, beginning with the issuance of executive orders and proclamations aimed at restoring faith in our legal immigration system. In addition, you have removed unnecessary barriers to naturalization for eligible individuals, withdrawn the punitive public charge rule, restored and expanded the Central American Minors Program, made it easier for active military personnel and veterans, including those residing outside the U.S., to become citizens, updated guidance on VAWA self-petitions to better align with the intent of the program, put a stop to the practice of returning applications with minor mistakes or omissions, and decreased the pending naturalization case queue by approximately 20% in 2021, and returned to pre-pandemic processing levels for naturalization. Thank you for your leadership on each of these accomplishments. But we cannot rest on our laurels. As of the end of January of this year, USCIS had a backlog of more than 5.26 million forms, representing nearly 62% of its total pending inventory. This is the most pressing challenge facing this agency right now. Congress provided $275 million in discretionary funding in the recently enacted funding bill for FY22 to help you address this problem, and your FY23 budget proposes additional appropriated resources to address for these purposes. For USCIS's humanitarian work, such as its asylum and refugee program, the request also reflects the beginning of an important and long overdue transition away from fee funding to appropriated funding, along with new discretionary resources to support asylum officer adjudication of asylum claims made by newly arriving migrants. Unfortunately, funding alone will not solve USCIS's challenges. The hiring freeze, in particular, has had a lasting detrimental impact on the agency. I look forward to hearing more from you today about the steps you are taking to address your staffing needs, the challenges you face, and where there are opportunities for improvement. I would now like to turn to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, Ranking Member Fleischman, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chairwoman Robillard, I really appreciate all of your efforts and hard work as the chair of this subcommittee, and I sincerely look forward to working with you and partnering with you as we begin our work on fiscal year 23 and its process. Welcome, Director Jadot. I thank you for joining us today. As we examine the USCIS budget request, I am deeply concerned about some of the most recent border security and immigration actions by this administration and what they portend for the future. USCIS officers have a front row seat to the border crisis that has been unfolding over the last 18 months. We have a record number of migrants crossing our borders illicitly, many of whom claim fear of persecution or torture should they return to their home countries. I do not doubt that there are many well-founded claims, but there are false ones too. It is well documented that migrants are coached on what to say by the cartels to maximize their chance of staying in the country. The job of USCIS officers is to make hard calls and separate legitimate from illegitimate claims, and that is no easy task. With the Title 42 Public Health Authority being lifted next month, I fear the surge that follows will completely overwhelm our border security and immigration capabilities. Managing the chaos from this unforced error will be a full-time job. As we turn to the USCIS budget request, once again, we see the administration proposes a nearly $500 million increase in appropriated dollars to address the growing number of applications waiting for a response. Backlogs are not a new development. Rather, they have existed for quite some time and grow daily. The fundamental problem with supplementing the agency's budget with appropriated dollars is that USCIS is designed to be a fee-funded agency and was never intended to be reliant on taxpayer funds except for a few programs like E-Verify. We should be very cautious about shifting the burden of these immigration services away from the individual fee payers. The remedy in the event of a deficit is simple. Exercise the authority provided for in the law and set the fees at a level that will ensure recovery of the full costs for providing all such services. USCIS's budget proposal also calls for $375 million for roughly 2,000 more asylum officers, in part to implement the administration's ill-advised asylum officer rule. Under the guise of expediting asylum claims, the administration proposes to have USCIS officers do the work of immigration judges and adjudicate these claims. This non-adversarial process is fundamentally flawed and will result in additional layers of appeals, lengthier adjudication timelines, and ultimately an increased backlog. In the middle of the border crisis, the president's budget proposes to hire nearly 7 times more asylum officers to manage this policy-driven crisis that the Border Patrol agents who work to prevent who worked to prevent it in the first place. I look forward to hearing how you intend to address the current backlog and the potential surge stemming from the removal of Title 42 authority. And I thank you for coming before us today. Madam Chairwoman, I yield back and I thank you.
Director Jadot, we will submit the text of your official statement for the hearing record. Please begin your opening statement, which I would ask you keep to 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Roybal-Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for taking the time to hear from me today. I'm honored to have this opportunity to update you on our agency's budget, which is grounded in fulfilling our incredible mission of upholding America's promise as a nation of welcome and possibility for all those we serve. With your support, USCIS has received appropriations in the past, and most recently, we are very grateful for the $275 million for USCIS to reduce the backlogs and support the President's refugee admissions ceiling, as well as the $193 million to support Operation Allies Welcome. Each case represents a person, a family, an opportunity, and a dream. It also represents a chance for our communities and our country to more fully benefit from the talents and energy immigrants have to offer. And every single applicant or petitioner who makes a request to USCIS should get an answer, be it yes or no, in a reasonable amount of time. Before we delve into the specifics of the budget, I want to note the work USCIS has done over the past year. A series of executive orders provided us with guideposts and milestones to improve our immigration system by removing barriers that prevent it from operating smoothly, securely, and responsively. One of the biggest barriers we face are a legacy of backlogs and lengthening processing times, delays that really help no one. We currently have about 8.5 million pending cases, and of those cases, about 5.3 million have been pending beyond published processing times. There are many reasons for these delays: the devastating effects of the pandemic on our ability to conduct our work, a fiscal crisis USCIS had never experienced, and many vacancies. While I know there still is much work to do, I want to take a moment to appreciate the staff of USCIS who've shown incredible dedication, resilience, and innovation in fulfilling the mission of USCIS throughout an unprecedented pandemic and under threat of furlough. Together, we have made progress. We've been working diligently to bring on new staff to fill many existing vacancies resulting from the year-long hiring freeze we experienced through mid-2021. I've implemented a hiring plan to achieve a 95% onboard rate by the end of 2022. I recently announced new cycle time goals for many key forms. We hope to achieve these goals by the end of fiscal year 23. It will take much work and ingenuity, but I'm confident we can get there. We have a plan to implement end-to-end electronic filing, processing, payment, and case management for USCIS. We've already made strides in implementing online filing options, including for employment authorization documents. We continue to review and revise regulatory policy and operational decisions with an eye towards breaking down unnecessary barriers that have hindered those eligible from accessing immigration and naturalization in a timely manner. In fiscal year 21, we held more than 2,000 virtual engagements with approximately 74,000 attendees, including over 2,000 local engagements and 47 national engagements, covering more than 20 topics. The fiscal year 23 budget supports the President's priorities by restoring faith in the immigration system, including implementation of a fair and efficient asylum process. A recently finalized asylum processing rule will ensure that those who are eligible for asylum are granted relief quickly, and for those who are denied, they are promptly removed. When fully implemented, we expect our asylum-related efficiencies will shorten the process to several months for most asylum applicants covered by the rule. Consistent and dedicated funding through appropriations is necessary to address our growing humanitarian workloads. Our asylum and refugee programs do not require fees, and without appropriated resources, the costs associated with these programs must be borne by all other fee-paying applicants and petitioners. As those costs increase, so do the costs to our fee-paying applicants and petitioners. The President's fiscal year 23 budget seeks to shift our humanitarian programs from fee funding to appropriations, aligning our agency with the appropriations received by other agencies doing similar work. Importantly, this request supports USCIS's multi-year plan to continue reducing the backlog, resource critical investments in cybersecurity, and sustain the verified program. USCIS is also prioritizing additional staff and technology improvements to reduce our growing backlog and to prioritize key forms, such as for work authorization and naturalization. Chairwoman Roybal-Allard, Ranking Member Fleischman, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for your continued support of our incredible and unique mission at USCIS. And thank you again for affording me the opportunity to appear before you and discuss the agency's fiscal year 23 budget. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Jadot. One of the things I have a significant concerns about the overall capacity of USCIS to execute its mission, both in terms of the new incoming workload and addressing the backlog. I'm also troubled that the agency hasn't been able to make significant strides in increasing its staffing levels since the hiring freeze was lifted over a year ago. I believe these staffing shortages are currently the biggest challenge that you face at this time. Do you agree with that assessment? And what are the primary factors behind USCIS hiring challenges, and what steps are you taking to address them?
Thank you, Chairwoman. So our approach to the backlog and our increasing processing times is multifaceted. We're hiring, as you noted, and we are trying to fill the existing vacancies that are within our budget. But we are also planning for the future when we propose and finalize a fee rule that is equitable, and also with the appropriations that you have provided in the past, and as well as hopefully in the future to fill those vacancies. They are a lot of vacancies, and certainly there is a lot of work for us to do. So what we have done is prioritized hiring as something we are working very, very closely with hiring officials across the agency. We're looking for efficiencies in our hiring process all over the place, including trying to lure back some of our former USCIS folks who left in recent years and trying to bring them back in a faster process. Also thinking about direct hiring authority, and we are working closely with the directors of each office and tracking every step of the process to ensure that no time is wasted with each step of the hiring process. It can be rather long, so we are trying to shorten it as much as possible. But it's not just about hiring. It's also about something I mentioned in my opening statement. It's about goals, setting goals for ourselves, which I just did. And that is something that is not just something we set and moved on. We are constantly trying to implement those goals, as well as efficiencies and technology.
Okay. Do you have a projected timeline of when you believe you'll be able to meet your hiring targets?
So we have a plan to achieve 95% fill rate of existing positions by the end of 2022.
So given all the challenges that USCIS has faced in the past few years, I am worried about the workforce and, it's the morale that you're facing right now. What actions are being taken to improve, the working conditions and restore employee morale?
So I am with you. If we don't improve employee morale, we will not get there. It is so important for us to stay focused on that. And this might sound a little bit not directly at employee morale, but in fact, strengthening our fiscal position, our fiscal management throughout the agency is critical. That rocked everybody's morale when that happened. And even now, I walked in August of last year, I feel the reverberating effects of that threatened furlough, something that USCIS never experienced in the past. It does make people question when they're thinking about maybe retiring earlier, or maybe there's another job in another agency with more security, or when we're trying to attract folks to the agency, they're thinking, wait a minute, is that an agency where perhaps I could lose my job? So these are things that if we're going to get there, if we're going to get to our processing goals, we need to secure the morale of the agency. And if the only way to do that is to say we're in this together, we're all going to protect each other. And that means fiscal management, careful fiscal management. So I consider my work with our CFO integral to every part of the agency and everything we do. Otherwise, we're not going to get there. And so that is one part of it. I think that's the base. But I am spending a lot of time listening. I am going across, not only virtually in settings like these, across the agency with town halls, big ones, small ones, but also now that we're in a hopefully healthier place with regard to the pandemic, I'm actually trying to travel to multiple offices all across the country, meet with our staff, hear from them, and then try not just listen, but also take what they're telling us and try to implement change to ensure that people are being heard and also able to conduct their work in the most efficient way possible, but in an environment that protects them.
Thank you. Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Again, welcome, Dr. Jadu, and I thank you for being with us this morning. The Biden administration has decided to end the use of the Title 42 Public Health Authority effective May 23rd. A substantial surge of migrants is likely to follow in quick succession, since about half of all encounters are currently amenable to removal under that authority. I have some questions. Is it likely that your asylum officers and perhaps others within USCIS will be diverted to address this surge?
Thank you for the question. So my job at USCIS is to ensure that we have enough officers available to do credible fear interviews, reasonable fear interviews for individuals coming across the southern border and other ports of entry. But also, we have a new rule that you had pointed to it in your opening statement, the asylum officer rule, a new thing we are doing with regard to this population. And so those are my dual missions. And as you know, we have been hiring for that new asylum officer rule. And then over here, because we have had in the past increases in credible fear, reasonable fear interviews, related type of interviews, we have a staff. Of course, if it grows tremendously, we are in the middle of hiring more and more people. So we're going to keep going. We don't see an end in sight in hiring. So clearly my job is to get us ready, and that is exactly what we're doing.
Okay, and believe me, I understand your efforts in that regard, but this is going to happen May the 23rd. Do you think that you're going to see a diversion of officers, asylum officers and others to address this surge? I guess I'm asking for right now.
Yeah, so we have a lot of individuals that are capable of doing and have the authority to do that already and are doing it. We certainly do have other people who are available as well. So whatever that surge, we will handle it as other emergencies come up at any time. We are always capable and ready. We have an incredible workforce. Again, that gets to the point about morale, is if we're going to continue to ask people to take on new duties on top of existing duties, then we need to ensure that they feel secure and in their jobs. And so that's part of what this request is about, to
Sure.
set that insurance policy for them.
In the event that these diversions occur, what kind of impacts will such diversions of resources have to USCIS? And I understand you're going to try to hire up to deal with this situation, but what types of diversions, what would that effect or impact be?
So it depends how large you're talking about it. This happens every day at USCIS, and I can give you the perfect example of Operation Allies Welcome, something none of us expected in the middle of the summer last year. We thought it would be a small program, and it grew rather quickly. But USCIS stepped up. We had 250 people from across our agency who volunteered to work at the military bases to assist with the population and ensure that they had work authorization in a rapid manner. So those types of situations are not uncommon for our agency. At the moment, of course, we're also thinking about Ukraine and some of the things that we need to do with regard to Ukraine. We are an agile workforce, and we always step up where there's a mission that we are asked to do. Is it easy? No. We have to set, obviously, priorities, and we do have a limited set of resources, and we always are constantly. It is a daily question: are those resources in the right places? And we ask ourselves practically every day how to move those resources around and ensure we are properly resourcing the proper priorities.
Understand. And I've got about a minute left. So based on what you've been able to explain to me, right now, you're not currently staffed to handle this increased workload, although you're trying to hire to do that. One follow-up question then, would it be fair to say that your case backlog will grow as the crisis on the border would get worse with this influx due to the Title 42 situation? In other words, do you anticipate the case backlog growing, ma'am?
So the important thing for me to answer here is we have a cadre of staff, not just in our refugee and asylum directorate, that are prepared and ready today to handle a lot of people. Will they have to put aside some other work? Yes, potentially, depending on how large or how small. So those are the questions. And sometimes it's just for a temporary period of time. So certainly we are always prepared for those possibilities. Does it take a toll on other work? It does sometimes. And the goal is to keep hiring enough so that when we have these new demands on our resources, that we do have a lot more capability to expand as needed without affecting things that are already on our plate in any way. That's the goal. The goal is to not have an effect on existing priorities. Sometimes it has a little bit of effect. That's the goal, just a little bit of effect here and there. We don't want it to move people completely away from their other priorities. So that's the balance we have here. And I think we're trying to get there by right sizing our agency to our growing humanitarian mission.
Thank you,
Mr.
Dr.
Cuellar.
Madam Chair, I'll yield
I'm sorry.
back and wait for round two. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cuellar?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, and certainly to our witness today. I just want to say we want to be supportive, as the chairwoman said, on your hiring, and I know you're trying to expedite the hiring, but let me just, I live on the border. I don't, like I always say, I don't come visit for a few hours. I live here. My family lives here. I drink the water. I breathe the air down here. And just to give you an idea of what we're seeing here, and I represent the Laredo sector, and I represent the Valley sector, Rio Grande, which is the highlight where most of the people are coming in. Just to give you an idea, just yesterday in just the southern part of my area, we had 2,000 individuals that were encountered in the Roma, Rio Grande, McAllen area. That's only one part. Doesn't include the part where Congressman Vicente Gonzalez or former Vela represent, but just to give you an idea, just 2,000 individuals in one day in one part. The Border Patrol sector in Laredo, which is another sector, has 60% of the Border Patrol that are not on the field, but are in the processing center, which means that they're only dealing with 40% of their personnel that are actually providing Homeland Security. The rest are changing diapers, doing all the important things to help the migrants, which are very important. We have 6 checkpoints here, which means that, like it happened when the real situation happened, they closed the checkpoints because they had to send the personnel because they're only dealing with 40%. That means that the checkpoints were open and people could pass drugs, whatever they have to do. So I'm giving you just a snapshot of what's happening. Just 2,000 individuals in one day in a very small part of my area. The hiring process that you're all doing, and we want to be helpful in any way, is going to be very important. Took me 2 years to try to establish 8 courts in Laredo, immigration judges. They still haven't hired all the immigration judges down here. So your asylum officers are going to be very important to address the credible fear. My question has to do with what the Appropriations Committee added, and that it was the joint migrant processing centers where $200 million were sent in. And part of it has to do where CBP, ICE, and USCIS are supposed to work together to help us establish so we can, those joint centers, so we hopefully be a little bit more efficient in addressing the situation in a one-stop center and hopefully get Border Patrol out on the fields. What can we do, Madam Director, to help you do your job? We want to be helpful to you.
So thank you. I appreciate all, and I have to say thank you for all the help that already has been provided to USCIS. And frankly, the cost of humanitarian programs at USCIS has skyrocketed since the beginning of our agency, approximately, a little less than 20 years ago. When we started as an agency under the Homeland Security Act in the early 2000s, the humanitarian mission was small. It was under 5% of our budget. And so it made complete sense at that point. Small surcharge to our other fee-paying applicants and petitioners, no problem, wasn't a big issue. We also didn't have multiple emergencies coming at us. For example, in less than a year, we had Operation Allies Welcome. Now we have Ukraine. It's lots of things happening that we have to step up and help with, not only directly at USCIS, but also in assistance of a whole of government effort as federal employees of DHS and also of the federal government. But now that small, little insignificant part of our budget has grown, and it will go from less than 5% to almost 20%. So almost a fifth of our budget will be our humanitarian mission. That is becoming a lot more significant of a surcharge to our applicants and our petitioners. Now we're looking at some real money, charging our applicants and petitioners a lot more for this than what was originally envisioned. That's the issue here. And that is the help we're looking for.
All right, thank you. I got about 20 seconds. If a person goes, if 100 people go in front of an immigration judge, about 10 to 12% are going to be accepted on the asylum claim. What is it for an asylum officer if they go before a credible fear? If they have 100 people, how many will be accepted? And my time's up, but if you can answer that.
Yeah, very quickly. So under our asylum officer rule, that's what we're trying to do in a faster, more efficient, but fair process, is have people work through our asylum officers first. And for those who are eligible, grant them more quickly. And for those who are not, deny them more quickly than the current process that you mentioned. You're unable to fill judge positions in your neighborhood. And here, what we're trying to do, we can much more quickly fill people. We can find asylum officers and fill them and train them well, much more quickly than the process for an immigration judge.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Henson.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Fleischman. I just want to thank you for holding this hearing today. Director Jadot, nice to meet you virtually. I appreciate you appearing before our subcommittee today as well. And I think we don't need to belabor the point today that we are all aware of the crisis at the southern border right now, a direct result of the administration's policies right now that I see as misguided. And I know you have a very heavy job to do in dealing with this strain that you are dealing with. And I understand the impact on the morale, not only at all of DHS, but USCIS as well. So I understand that in our office, we are focused on customer service here. That means helping constituents with the casework needs that obviously interact with your office too. And there are some delays, and it's very frustrating for my constituents for them to encounter those delays with USCIS, mostly because of the processing backlog. So when I look at the administration's request for $375 million and nearly 3,000 officers to deal with the new asylum cases, my biggest question is what measures are being taken there, other than just hiring up, but what measures are being taken to improve customer service for those who have followed the rules, they're legally residing and working in Iowa, and they need to access those casework services.
Thank you for raising that question, because that is a high priority of mine. It's not just the service of ensuring that we are timely responding. Again, it's not about getting to yes or no, it's about getting to the right answer in a reasonable amount of time. And that we're not able to do in a lot of cases, over 60% of our cases at this time. So that is a heavy focus of mine. In fact, I have 5 priorities I've laid out for the year, and that is one of them. But also another priority there is customer service. It's not just being able to make the decision on that case in a reasonable period of time, but also when somebody has a problem and needs to call us because something has happened in their case and needs to reach a person, a human being. Absolutely. The situation we have now is not serving our applicants and petitioners well. And
right.
so
do you know how long the wait time is right now when someone calls in?
I have heard it can be upwards of an hour, and that to me is concerning. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be necessarily that, but we shouldn't keep people on hold. Is there a way, as many businesses in the private sector do, we have a wait time for X period of time. Would you like to be called back? Please leave your phone number. We are looking at technologies like that and trying to institute those technologies. But the reality is, that when you have to talk to a person, that means we need a person who has knowledge and experience on casework. And those people are at the moment up to here trying to process cases. So that's the trick. That's the balance. How do we ensure we keep enough people processing so that our delays go down? We don't have them anymore. At the same time, servicing people, ensuring that they can talk to us when they need to. So we're trying to leverage technology, have people use online tools, at the same time growing our customer resources, our human beings in customer service.
Yeah, well, and I want to be very clear. I'll follow up on what one of my colleagues already addressed, but I just want to make sure we're not diverting people from their work there to handle that casework to handle increased surge, because we have to first and foremost focus on the people who are doing it right. So that's number one. The other question I wanted to ask about the crisis in Europe, obviously hitting home with what's happening in Ukraine. I've been meeting with families from my district who are trying to adopt children from Ukraine, and obviously heart-wrenching, very powerful stories. Mom of 2 boys myself, and I think about what these children are facing and those families are facing as Putin and his thugs destroy their homeland. So, American families are bonding with these kids. They're hopeful that they're going to be reunited. So are you following these cases and the challenges that these families are facing in adopting these children and bringing them to the country? What, if anything, is USCIS doing to help support these families?
Thank you for that really important question. And I noted that one of the things, again, and one of the new humanitarian missions that has directly hit us is Ukraine. And even before the announcement by the president to resettle a number of people, we at USCIS immediately stepped back and said, as we did with Afghanistan, what is the current population of people seeking some kind of service of USCIS, and how do we ensure that those folks are getting expedited so we can bring them here as quickly as possible? If they're already in our pipeline and they're going to get to a potential yes, well, then why don't we try to hurry that up in a crisis like this? So that's the question we have asked of all of our programs, and we'll continue to do that. And of course, if there are any cases or any concern that you have, please do raise them with us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for keeping us in the loop on that, and working with the State Department to get that done. So thank you. And I realize I'm out of time, Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for calling today's hearing. Director Jadot, I was glad to see that USCIS took steps earlier this year to replace the Trump administration's harmful public charge rule. By discouraging immigrants and their families from using legal healthcare and other services during a pandemic, this rule made all of our communities less safe. But rescinding the Trump administration rule does not mean that the real fear it created in the lives of our neighbors has been rescinded with it. The very same week the Biden administration proposed its new public charge rule, I heard from a constituent who is voluntarily canceling her SNAP benefits. She is a citizen with a baby on the way, and she's scared that receiving any government assistance will impact her husband's visa application. My staff has tried to connect her with other resources and to explain how the new rule will keep her family safe, but the damage has been done, and this is just one family out of many. It's clear that our federal government has a lot more work to do here. Can you describe what USCIS is doing to proactively communicate the removal of previous public charge rule? And specifically, please share any community outreach strategies that you're deploying, which languages that you've published information, and if you've worked with local groups that have community trust to disseminate information.
Thank you for that question. It's something that has been raised in multiple stakeholder engagements that I've done in person across the country. So first of all, some of the things that we have done, first of all, is to ensure that on our website, it is very clear we are not applying the 2019 public charge rule. It is also very clear from social media that we try to do as much as possible, repeatedly reminding it's not being applied. We are also working with our federal partners who have these programs, as you mentioned, one of them SNAP benefits, so that they have the same information and can disseminate the information that we have to the people they work with directly, multiple federal agencies. The one thing that I have gathered, as I think you have, is from our stakeholder engagements in the field, is sometimes that information is still not getting through. So I have asked in my multiple in the last several months that I've been out is how can we partner with you to go to your engagements? You're the spokesperson. You have the trusted voice in the community. How can I partner with you? Whether it's in person, whether it's virtually, me directly, our folks who are working in the field, showing up to your events where you're communicating that this is a federal official from USCIS. Right. And so that is something we're working very closely with the stakeholder community on.
Great. I would like to see that scaled up, and perhaps you can communicate to the committee some specifics around that, but also languages. It is very important that this information not be shared just in English. And we have the expectation, and I believe your agency has the resources to publish the public charge information in multiple languages. Okay.
You do.
It's really important that we have a proactive plan to address, this information in an accessible way and to counteract the lingering fear and misinformation that persists in our communities. How could USCIS expand and improve this outreach with more resources, and what specific resources do you need from Congress to do this?
So of course, this budget, our budget all along has primarily been fee funded, 97%. So whenever we're asked to do anything that increases the need to spend money, certainly it means we have to find it somewhere within that fee paying population. So what we're trying to do now is to say that our humanitarian mission has grown beyond an insignificant small portion of our budget It is much larger, and we're constantly having to shift our resources around. So we can't always have available money to do the things that you're talking about. And so we're trying to change that so that we are a little bit more comfortable and not always robbing from Peter to pay Paul and then increasing our backlogs.
Okay,
So that's the goal here.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that we have the same goal of an immigration system that aligns with America's morals and values, but candidly, to really counter the harms done by the previous public charge rule, we have a lot of work left to do. And I encourage USCIS to increase its efforts in this area and in the partnerships with trusted groups. And I stand ready to assist here in Congress, and I yield back.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Rutherford.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member, and thank you, Madam Secretary. You know, one of the things that I always talk to folks back home about is, you know, being a member of Congress is really about helping our constituents back home. One of the pieces that is often overlooked, I think, by, oddly enough, by the folks back home. As the backlog at USCIS has grown, back home, I can tell you this is becoming a bigger and bigger portion of the casework that my district is working on. Everything from employment authorizations to travel documents, all of them are taking longer. Not only are processing times taking longer, but just getting communications back, which used to be done, you know, very, very quickly. And it's my understanding that the wait times to hear back on inquiries are long now, in some cases actually taking over 2 months, which seems almost impossible to me. But I also understand that there's been some difficulties in getting in contact with people at the service centers, where the phones just ring and or you get a voicemail. Can you give me an update on how, now I heard you say, I think by the end of 2022, you expect what percentage to be back?
So by the end of 2022, we would like to be 95% filled. And by the end of fiscal year 2023, reach our cycle time goals.
Okay, so in your new fee structure, historically, the agency was about 97%, I understand 97% fee-based.
Yes.
But clearly, that's not going to be possible with all the refugee issues and all the humanitarian issues that are being forced upon us, particularly if Title 42 is done away with. Can you talk about the strain that that's going to put on your system as well? And are you asking for more money from the taxpayer to cover USCIS now than fees?
So there are in many of the humanitarian programs that we participate in, there are other agencies that do similar work. For example, the State Department has a major role in refugee processing, Health and Human Services as well, in unaccompanied children, as well as refugee processing. We have our part in refugee and asylum. But unlike, for example, the State Department and HHS, we are primarily fee funded. They are not, right. And they have never been fee funded in that way. So what we're trying to do is align ourselves with that so we can be better prepared to handle the mission. And it's not just things like that we can plan for, which, you know, we can plan for a set number of refugees. We can plan for, you know, things like that you can plan years in advance. Operation Allies Welcome showed up. We had to take care of that situation. Right. Same thing with Ukraine, completely unexpected. Our process to obtain more funding is to go through an Administrative Procedures Act rulemaking process, which you can imagine is a very time-consuming process that is not agile enough to keep up with that type of humanitarian need. So right. We are asking for some help from Congress so that we could be more agile and prepared while we are doing it. We are meeting the need, but at the cost and expense then of the people who are paying into it, because we cannot quickly fundraise the amount we need to cover. So that's why I'm so thankful for Operation Allies Welcome Money.
So looking at, Title 42 is about the health of our country by excluding people that potentially had COVID-19. I would suggest to you also that the fentanyl that's coming across the border, the opioids that is coming across the border, because we have this open border policy, is also a health hazard to our country. And we need to be looking at that in the context of people that are going into the USCIS process, and the funds aren't there to assist those people who are trying to do things legally and properly. And so I would hope that you would be sharing that message as well as we try to fund you properly. So with that, Madam Chair, I see my time has run out, and I yield back.
Mr. Price?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome, Director Jadot. Thank you for your testimony and for your good work. I serve on 3 appropriations subcommittees, and I think it's fair to say that of all the agencies covered across that spectrum, yours is the one that suffered most from the Trump administration. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say the Trump administration tried to destroy your agency, to shut you down, stripping funding, stripping personnel, and closing a majority of the field offices overseas that deal with your cases, closing, I believe, 16 international field offices. That leaves 7 in operation right now. That's likely one of the reasons for the backlog that you've described. It's clear you're still fighting an uphill battle with staffing shortages and a fiscal crisis for the agency and the effects of COVID. I mean, your agency has really been through the ringer. Despite all this adversity, we do count on you, especially now, for important work. And I want to address a couple of aspects of that, giving you a chance to elaborate on earlier answers. TPS, temporary protected status. The current issue of backlogs clearly has an effect on your ability to deal with the TPS, let alone new TPS populations, which now are going to include tens of thousands of Ukrainians and people from Afghanistan, people who were recently added to the TPS list. So what resources are you going to need to see this through, this escalation in TPS cases from places that we know we have to extend this to people who have been displaced by cruel conflicts? And then what about those international field offices, those shuttered international field offices? It's not as easy, I know, as simply flipping a switch to get back this infrastructure that's been lost. But what resources here too do you need from Congress to make this happen? What are your plans with regard to the international offices, and what kind of resources do those require?
So thank you. That is, you hit it right on the money. When a crisis like Ukraine or Afghanistan happens and TPS is provided to protect people, it means that USCIS all of a sudden has to step up and create a process for a whole new set of people, sometimes tens of thousands of people, to be processed and obtain TPS and then work authorization in as swift as a manner as possible. But we can't grow overnight to handle that. That's why we're trying our best now to fill our agency to the maximum extent possible, so that with the ability to move and be agile, to handle new emergencies that come in like this, like the ones you mentioned. So our effort to be able to be ready for something like that can't just be hiring. It can't just be more people. It's also thinking about how to leverage technology. Every day it improves and we are getting better and better at it. Having online filing for TPS now, that's a big deal. From end-to-end application to final decision. That's really, really important and helpful. It's also really important for us to take a look at each of our processes and ask ourselves questions about why are we doing things the way we've been doing them for decades now? So much has changed. Let's make sure that we're not unnecessarily creating bureaucracies and really thinking how most efficiently, but also securely, and ensuring that we are following the law all the way through, but most efficiently. So those are a lot of the questions that we're asking ourselves now. With regard to international offices, our Refugee and Asylum and International Offices Division at USCIS is engaged in a study to determine where is the best place to reopen offices, how much that will cost us. We, as you mentioned, we do have some offices that are currently open, but we do believe there are more that need to be opened. We just need to make sure they are in the right places and ensure that we have the money to do so without, again, robbing from Peter to pay Paul.
Thank you. I, of course, will be interested as soon as that analysis is completed. We'll be very interested in what you conclude and what it requires. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Aguilar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Ranking Member, Director Jadu. I wanted to talk a little bit about DACA applications and the backlog. In 2021, there was a significant backlog of DACA applications, in part because of the reopening of the program. Unfortunately, many DACA recipients experienced a lapse in status, causing them to lose their jobs and fear deportation. In fiscal year 2023 request, you were requesting $255.9 million for backlog reduction. This builds on the investment Congress has made from fiscal years 22 and additional authorities provided to USCIS through the fiscal year 2021 omnibus. What's the current status of the DACA application backlogs, and can you share how this increased backlog reduction funding will support DACA renewal and reduce application processing times?
So thank you, and you're right, exactly right. 2021 was not a good year for DACA, given all the things you mentioned. The good news is that we took a look at the process, the renewal process, to ensure that we are doing it as efficiently as possible. We were also taking a look at what were some of the reasons why people were getting to the end, their expiring period, and trying to determine what was slowing those types of cases down and how we can make improvements to ensure they don't get there. We've implemented a lot of those things now. And the good news is that most people are being the median is now under 30 days processing time. Now, are some people still arriving and getting close to their expiring date? Yes. What we have found, however, is the very significant majority of those cases that do get to that place is because they're not filing on time. And so we are asking people very, very publicly on our website, through social media, file between 120 and 150 days, and you can be pretty safe that you will be processed in time today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But the backlog, the queue that has been cleared, or so individuals who have discussed that it's being ironed out. And so I understand what you're saying on a prospective perspective, but folks who have been in the queue are being addressed in a timely way. You're convinced?
So at the moment, if people timely file, we believe we can get through their cases on time. But of course, as you know, we have a large backlog in all of our areas. So you've probably seen that our employment authorization document backlog is quite large, and it's actually our largest. And that is a person's ability to put food on their table, to have a house, and frankly, during a labor shortage, to contribute to the overall economy. So we have prioritized taking a look at how to improve through technology, through improvements in our operational processes. Also taking a look at the length of time we provide employment authorization documents. In some cases, it was only for a year, but the processing time was longer than that. So we said, well, let's extend it for 2 years. So that helps us because it eliminates how many times we have to keep looking at those documents. And it also helps the individual because they don't have to keep applying and paying the fee as often as they do. We also, if you have seen, there is a regulation we are working on that was recently sent to the OMB for review, which would take a look at auto extensions while we are in the phase of processing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Wanted to ask one more question about asylum, and I know that you touched on this briefly. As you know, Homeland Security and Department of Justice recently announced a new rule that would expand the role of USCIS asylum officers in adjudicating asylum claims. The stated goal of the new rule is to reduce existing backlogs. Can you share the steps that USCIS intends to take to ensure that there is due process with access to an attorney in this process and to make sure that we have the proper controls in place?
Absolutely. So there are many steps in the process that are laid out in the rule. And currently in the 60-day implementation period, we are getting ready as quickly as possible to develop the final materials and train all of the individuals on those materials and the steps in the process to ensure due process and that people have access to counsel, the time they have to get access to counsel. I'm happy to have our staff brief you on as we get closer and closer to the finalization of implementation so that you can see how exactly we're going to ensure due process in that, as well as, of course, efficiency so that we can ensure that people who are eligible are granted quickly and those who are not are denied quickly.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Yield back, Madam Chair.
Okay, I believe that completes the first round, so I have enough time for a second round. Director, USCIS's financial crisis in 2020 was really a wake-up call when it was projected that the deficit would be $602 million. While the financial strains on that agency at that time could be partially attributed to the pandemic, there were also avoidable detrimental policy and operational choices that were made by the prior administration, as well as a pattern of year-over-year spending that exceeded collections. You've touched a little bit on how financially you're doing today, if you care to elaborate a little bit on that. But I'm also interested in what actions you've taken to improve financial planning and discipline at USCIS.
Thank you so much. I should start by saying a lot of credit goes to our CFO for the incredible work that she was able to do to restabilize the agency. We tightened our belts and we had a hiring freeze. We cut contracts. What did this all mean, though? In addition to the pandemic posture we were in and trying to learn how to conduct our mission in a pandemic, which many of our services do require in-person work with the public and amongst ourselves, we needed to do all that at the same time. We have done pretty well, but the result, of course, has been an increase in our processing times and our backlog. But now that we are returning to normal receipts, we've taken a look at unnecessary bureaucratic steps that we could remove from processes so that we could go a little bit faster, that doesn't cost us a lot. We're also relooking at some of those contracts that had to be cut. And of course, we lifted the hiring freeze, but that hiring freeze meant that we got to a pretty high vacancy rate. So that is why we are so focused now, because we spent about a year without replacing attrition. And it is so important now that we're able to replace all of that attrition, continued attrition, and as well as growing to where we need to be, because we're not just below where we needed to be years ago. we're also below where we need to be now and in the future. The good news is, in the tightening of our belt, we were able to restore our carryover balance, which is incredibly important. This is not an agency that can count on every year Congress paying the bills. We have to pay 97% of the bills, has been our history. And so we need to have, I look at it as my own budget. I can either live check to check and then hope I don't lose my job, or I can have a savings. And if I lose my job, it is okay. I can tide myself over. And so that's as simple as it is. And having a healthy savings account, a healthy carryover to tide us over when perhaps receipts are low, or we have a big contract that's come due, that we have the money available and we don't have to potentially turn to furlough, because that is detrimental, and not just for the moment, but for years. As I stated earlier, we're feeling the effects of it.
Director, in the recent past, USCIS policies, regulations, and operational changes have been implemented without robust analysis of the impacts on USCIS funding and operations. This lack of analysis was a major contributing factor to USCIS's financial hardship in 2020. As you contemplated and implemented various reforms, how have you addressed the need for these kinds of analysis?
So we have working groups that think about how to make changes at USCIS, whether it's operations, policy, regulatory, and we invite our Office of the CFO to participate in those. But it's also something that I do regularly with the people who are developing policy in the agency, to ask that question: how much is this going to cost us? And it's also my question to our CFO: can we afford this? And in any recommendation that any part of USCIS is making is, did you talk to the CFO? Ask them, can we afford this? And what are we going to have to cut in order to afford this? So always taking a step back and thinking about, just as you would in running your own household.
Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you again, Madam Chair, for this hearing. On March 24th, Doctor, USCIS issued a final asylum officer rule. The request asks for $375 million to hire an additional 2,000 asylum officers to do work that immigration judges currently perform. The USCIS has used existing funds to start this work with about 200 asylum officers, but then we'll need to hire a significant number of additional personnel. My first question, please, is: do you have concerns about replacing the current adjudication of asylum claims, where ICE attorneys can offer evidence of a false claim, with something that is non-adversarial in nature? Is it likely that more fraudulent claims could make it through the system?
So while at the moment, until this rule is finalized, we review asylum claims only in the affirmative case, that is background and experience we have, and we are trained, very well trained. The training that our officers go through before they are begin adjudicating, along with supervisory support and training throughout, they know how to look for those things. This is not a program that is easy to run, and certainly we have experience and we know we can do it well. So what we are doing now is phasing this program in with existing money that we do have and we've identified for this purpose. And so we're coming to you now to ask you for money so that we can grow that to a much greater extent, because we do believe that this is the way forward, where we have that experience. We know how to do affirmative asylum. We think we can do it well here too, and we will do it for a smaller cost and faster than is currently done now. And if I could just say that the process with the immigration court has not been eliminated in this asylum officer rule. We're just the first step. So what we're trying to do is look for those who are eligible and get them through the process faster. And then for those who are not eligible, they would be denied. Now, for those who are denied, the court is still there too. They have a process they're going to be reviewing as well. So this is a change in that we're trying to make the process go faster, ensuring fairness and due process at the same time be more efficient.
Understood. Then let me ask you a follow-up, if I may. Generally, what percentage of migrants are determined to have credible fear by asylum officers? And when those cases get to an immigration judge, what normally happens? What percentage, if you know, does the judge find a credible fear?
So are you talking not under the asylum officer rule, the one that we're about to implement, or the current
process?
The current process. So I'd have to get back to you specifically on by country. I don't have those numbers directly with me. So I'm happy to get back with you on those numbers.
Okay. Madam Chair, how much time do I have? I can't see the clock.
You have a minute and 15 seconds.
Okay, thank you. I will continue to ask them. Thank you. Hiring has been a challenge at USCIS. How long do you estimate it will take to hire 2,000 asylum officers?
So if I can use our example of what we're aiming towards now, we are aiming to get to 3,500 hires by the end of this year, 2022. So if I can use that as an example, that will help us understand how long it will take to hire about 2,000.
Got you. Hypothetical, but if Congress declines to fund these additional officers, will you be able to execute the asylum office rule?
We would have to decide how much money is available at USCIS with our current funding through our fee-paying population to determine what percentage we could afford to send over to the asylum officer role.
I believe my time, Madam Chair, is about up. Dr. Jadu, thank you so much for your testimony today, and I yield back.
Mr. Cuellar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director, I'd like to follow up on what I was talking about a few minutes ago and just give you a little bit more context. I gave you the number of agents, Border Patrol agents in the Laredo sector that are out in the processing centers and not in the field. I just asked my friends down there in the Rio Grande Valley, and it's about the same. 50 to 60% of the Border Patrol agents are in the processing centers and not out in the fields. So 40 to 50% are doing the Homeland Security job, and the rest are dealing with that. They're also, just to give you an idea, this is all matter of context. I have not even touched Title 42. That's a totally different thing. This is just current situation. Just in the Lower Rio Grande area in my district, last week they dealt with 20 large groups just in 1 week. And what they now classify as a large group is a group that has over 100 people in that group. So they had 20 large groups of 100 plus, and that doesn't include the other individuals. So just to give you that context, and that's why I wanted to follow up on the question that I asked you, and if you don't have the answer, if you can follow up. The Joint Migrant Processing Centers, we want to work with you. We're hoping, as a chairwoman and us, we feel that this, by doing a one-stop center, if I can use that, working with CBP, ICE in your office, we can hopefully move that more efficiently and provide due process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I like to see what your plans are, if you have that, number one. And number two, I like to follow up what Representative Fleshman said also. I had asked this, for immigration judges, there are 1.6 million cases backlogged. The average time is about 875 days. Texas has the largest number of backlogs of any other state. And And if 100 people go before an immigration judge, usually, and every case is different, 90 to 88% are going to be rejected on asylum cases. So I want to know the same type of figures on your asylum folks as to number one, what's the backlog? And I just gave you the contents of just my part of the area in my district. Number two, if some go before a asylum officer, if you have 100 people, how many will be rejected? How many will be accepted? And I know every case is different. I understand that, but I like to, look at numbers where immigration judges are at and where asylum officers are at to address due process. And whoever is supposed to stay here, I say bienvenidos, or whatever the language might be. But on the ones that are not accepted, a credible fear is not established, then we have to enforce the law and say goodbye to them. So if you don't have those figures, I'd like to have those figures and share with me and the rest of the committee, if you don't mind, and your plans for the joint migrant processing centers too.
Yeah, and we're happy to do that and share them with your staff and with you. Certainly on the joint migrant processing centers, we're working together with our partners at CBP and ICE on how we would create these programs. What our part would be, we all play a role, the three of us. We're in it together. And so what I can do is take back the request to get a briefing so that we can talk together. I wouldn't want to just talk about my part without them in the room as well. So let's plan for that. And then secondly, with regard to the data, clearly, this is part of phasing this in, is to learn, what are those numbers going to be? We have experience in the affirmative asylum, but that's different. It's a different population sometimes. And so it's somewhat apples and oranges, but also some similarities. So we will see what the numbers will look like. That is the phased in approach, and we're going to study it along the way. It also depends, since we are going to phase it in, we're not going to be able to apply it immediately to everybody. So depending on where we apply it, the location, the groups of people that we're applying it to, it will have different results depending on who the population is that's coming to you. So more to come for sure, and we're happy to share that with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ms. Henson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, thanks, Director, for sticking with us through this hearing for a second round. I appreciate it. And I want to kind of follow up on some of the areas that my colleagues have already talked about in terms of the asylum officers, with the plans to transition away from relying on the immigration judge to these asylum officers in the credible fear cases, and giving them the authority, obviously, to make the decisions on who is eligible to remain in the country. So my question is kind of a follow-up on the training side. When we talk about an immigration judge and their training versus the asylum officers, what training do they have that can allow them to accurately determine the credible fear claim compared to what an immigration judge is currently doing?
So that's something that we're training on. Actually, we're going to have a training in a few weeks to get all of the new folks who've come on for this rule, very specifically now that it's been finalized, exactly what the rules requirements are. We're leaning, of course, on the things we already do know about similar things that we do at USCIS, as well as information that we have from the immigration courts. So it's a holistic approach. We're taking a look at the way things are done, but also recognizing this is a new process. So there are going to be some new things that we're establishing. And I like to say we've hired the best of the best, and we have put our best on this new program to make sure that we can do it as well as we possibly can from the get-go, and then just continue to build on it and continue to train. We're going, nothing's perfect in the beginning. So we'll work it out. And of course, we'll be happy to share with you as this goes on and gets phased in more and more, how this will work. I am hopeful that we are going to be successful in the beginning. We have a really great group of people, a lot of people focused on getting it right first round, and being trained properly.
Okay. I've just asked you continue to follow up with our office. If you could maybe even come
Absolutely.
up with some examples of cases where these asylum officers with this new training and this new rule have been able to flag some of those not qualified credible fear claims, just so we have an idea of what that threshold actually is in implementation. That would be great. And then just a quick question too about obviously, we've got a huge influence right now with cartels, human smugglers, bad actors at our southern border, and we know they are coaching people on what to say when they're coming across the border. So what are you doing to counter those efforts by, again, those bad actors to coach illegals on what to say to try to get that credible fear claim?
So our officers are trained to look for that. And what we're doing with this asylum officer rule is the collection of information right in the beginning with the credible fear part of this. And from there, it includes a thorough interview. So it is not just a paper form, and that is not going to be questioned, the veracity of the statements made, and also the individual establishing a rapport and ensuring that the person is legitimately stating a story that can be verified. And that is exactly how we're training our officers to ensure that they look for the right things in the individual, but as well as the evidence that needs to be provided to prove what it is the person is stating. It's not a 2-minute type of thing. This is something that will take some time to establish that rapport, ask all the right questions, and document it. And our officers do that. They do that in the refugee context. They're very good at it. So we have ways to do this in different contexts that are quite similar. I am confident in our workforce. And again, we did hire a lot of experienced people from the Refugee and Asylum International Offices Division here at USCIS to come on to these new roles, specifically for that reason, because they have a background and they're launching into a new program. So it is those skills we need to be able to then craft and into this new program.
Okay. And just a quick follow-up on what Congressman Cuellar just mentioned about the backlog and how long it's taking, 875 days. It's a significant amount of time, obviously. And I'd be interested also, in when we hear about the number of cases that are denied at that point, are people showing up to those hearings? I think that's the biggest concern I have too. If it's that long of a time frame, where are they going in that time frame while they're waiting for that hearing to happen, and then is that follow-up actually happening on that side? So if you could follow up with that information for us, I would certainly appreciate it.
Okay, will do.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Mr. Rupersberger?
Yes, Madam Chair. Director, glad to see you. I think the first time, and you have a big challenge, and we're here to help. First thing, I was recently made aware of your decision to prioritize new processing, or what you called cycle time goals for key USCIS immigration forms. I do understand that COVID has caused some delays, and we have seen this across the entire bureaucracy. However, my district caseworkers have informed me about the unacceptable wait time my constituents are facing. For this reason, I'm very pleased to hear that you are taking this matter seriously. My question for you are, how far along are you in establishing the guidelines? How quickly can we expect to see these improvements? And what can Congress do to help?
Thank you so much. Even when I was going through my confirmation hearings, so last summer, I saw this as the number one priority in terms of what USCIS was facing. And I see this as the top priority for a director at this time. So I couldn't agree with you that we need to tackle this. So from the very beginning, when I got here last August, I started with bringing someone directly into my office whose sole goal is to think about how we can improve, make more efficient our operations, consider policies that are outdated and really are just creating unnecessary barriers, to think about regulations that perhaps we could propose to make things a little more smoothly and go a little more smoothly and efficiently. So we have already taken several of those steps, but boy, those were the low hanging fruit. There's a lot to go. But there's also, as I've mentioned, is hiring. We had a hiring freeze and we are very low staffed at this point. There just simply aren't enough people to do the work that's in front of us. So we need more people. We need to think work smarter, not harder. That's really important. We need to institute even more technology, which we're heavily focused on. So those are the multiple steps that we're taking now. And that is why we're here, frankly, is one of the reasons, not all of the reasons, but one of the reasons why we have a hard time staying focused on those goals, those cycle time goals, is in the middle of trying to run towards that very important goal. We have incoming emergencies, Operation Allies Welcome, Ukraine. Oh, we need to assist with the latest crisis with regard to the whole of federal government. There could be an emergency in California. We're part of the Department of Homeland Security. We volunteer to help. We're all in this together. So there's just a lot that comes at us, and we want to stay focused. And to the extent that we can have funding that supports our humanitarian mission, that underlying basis of our funding, as well as the ability to be agile and shift funding around when new emergencies arise, that's going to be crucial. And that's why this budget request is there. It recognizes that. It recognizes the growing humanitarian mission that I think the entire nation supports. So we don't think that it is sustainable to continue to go through fee rules, lengthy fee rule processes, and then charge our fee-paying customers so much more now that it's growing so large.
How about the issue of time? How much longer do you think?
So the time, so our goal, our cycle time goals are to be achieved. This is our ultimate goal by the end of fiscal year 23. Obviously, we'll see improvement along the way, but the established goals of 6 months for some of our major forms, and then 3 months for example, a work authorization, will be by the end of fiscal year 23. And along the way, you're going to see improvements until we get there.
Are we having another round?
You're muted, Madam Chair.
Sorry. Yes, we will. I'm going to open it up after Ms. Underwood for any additional questions that someone may have. So you'll have an opportunity. So Ms. Underwood.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to follow up on a topic that many of my colleagues have already mentioned. Director Jadot, you inherited a work visa backlog of historic levels that was exacerbated by the pandemic, hiring freezes, and poor administration. We simply cannot sustain a backlog of 8.5 million cases that continues to grow, nor can we ask people to wait over 10 months for their requests to be adjudicated. I've heard from countless constituents whose lives have been put on hold because of these backlogs. One instance I'm thinking about is a constituent who was applying for an employment authorization document. Because of the delays in processing his application, his driver's license expired. So while he benefited from the automatic 180-day extension for his employment authorization, he could not drive to the appointments necessary to keep his job. Director Jadot, what is USCIS doing to help applicants deal with the unintended economic and personal consequences of a backlog exceeding the 180-day extension timeline? And what recommendations do you have for my casework staff and I to better help our constituents work through these challenges?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on work authorization, especially because it is the ability to work and
absolutely.
Yeah. absolutely. And it's not just for the individuals, for the community, it's for the larger economy. So it is, I'm saying that there's a tremendous priority and focus on our backlog, but inside that backlog is particularly work authorization. So if I could just point out that in January of 2017, there were 1.5 million cases in the backlog. So those beyond our processing goals, our cycle time goals. And in total across the agency, that alone is what is pending in the employment authorization queue now.
Right.
So it's a huge issue. So a few things. One, we've been looking at how to extend periods of authorization so that people don't have to keep coming back to us. So that lessens the number of cases coming in. It also gives people more time and saves them that additional fee they have to pay for that year. We've extended in some cases. We have also looked at technological improvements that would allow people to file online and completely do the electronic processing, which is a savings of time for the individual and for us as we process. We're also looking at, are there processes in place in the employment authorization, particularly in renewals, which is a lot of cases in our backlog, how to take out some things that don't really need to be there, that are just creating extra steps for no reason. So that's another space. We've also been working on a regulation with regard to an auto extension when we're backlogged as we are. So those are some of the steps, but we are constantly thinking every possibility, policy, operational, regulatory, what can we do to not only get rid of the backlogs we have, but also ensure a future where we don't get there again.
Yes, ma'am. And also designing processes, recognizing that this is just an initiation of a domino effect. And so when USCIS gets it wrong or is delayed or there's some kind of impediment, there are real life consequences for folks. And then they call us and we are having a hard time, quite frankly, getting updates as well. And so it's just extremely challenging. And so as you can emphasize with your teams, the need for efficiency and recognizing the significance of this effort for the lives of our neighbors and colleagues. And you know what I mean? This is important for our economy that we get it right. Okay, my next question is, in your testimony, you mentioned your plan to implement end-to-end electronic filing, processing, payment, and case management. Can you elaborate on the advancements that USCIS has made in the automation of these processes and how it affects the processing backlog?
Yeah, so a few points here. Almost 85% of what we process is processed online. And when I say that is, we're processing it that way. So that helps us because you can move work around more efficiently. And there are just so many efficiencies through that. Mm-hmm. It's even if a paper application comes in, we're digitizing it, getting it online and processing it online because that is more efficient than a paper moving around our agency. We've also, took us a long time, but we have gotten to credit card payments. So that's very good. We also have a lot of forms that are available for online filing, the 821, the 821D. So that's TPS, DACA, family-based petitions, the naturalization application, extensions of status, changes of status, things like that. So we're moving through that process to try to bring more and more forms online. That is going to be critical to this effort. And in the meantime, we're coming up with, like I just mentioned, when a paper comes in, it is an extra step, but digitizing it actually saves us even more, even if it is having to take that extra step rather than being able to just online file, because that is a process that takes a little bit more time to develop.
Well, thank you so much. I yield back.
Mr. Rubersberger?
Okay, thank you. Okay, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes.
Director, your recent announcement to release 35,000 supplemental visas exercising the authority Congress granted to you in the FY22 omnibus was welcome news to the many seasonal businesses across the country who are facing dire labor shortages, especially the seafood industry in Maryland. We all love our crabs and oysters, by the way, and who pick the finest crabs in the world. Last year, we were grateful that 22,000 additional H-2B visas were released to supplement the second half cap allocation for FY21. Unfortunately, the rule wasn't published until late May due to the time it took to process the petitions, allocate the additional visas, and then bring the workers into the country. Many H-2B workers were not on their employer's payroll until the end of the 4th of July. Now, the recent filings with DOL for the second half of fiscal year clearly show there will be significant workforce disruptions if additional cap relief does not materialize soon. And this, coupled with a record low unemployment, illustrated the urgent need for these workers. And my question, can you please shed light on the timing of publishing a temporary final rule implementing your decision to release the additional 35,000 visas to ensure these employers currently in a labor crisis receive their workers as close to the date of the need as possible? And I do recognize that the TFR is in its drafting stage, and you may not be able to offer specific details, but I do need assurances you are working on it and we're going to complete it.
Absolutely working on it. The announcement that was made by the Department of Homeland Security, that was made with the thought that we were very clearly working on it and moving in that direction. We're working as quickly as possible. I will note it is a regulatory process, despite the fact it's a temporary final rule, so a much faster process in the regulatory process. But as the former chief counsel to this agency, regulatory processes are very slow, even the most efficient of processes. So certainly, I would welcome in the future changes in the law that would allow us to move more swiftly, in a more agile way. I know we've offered technical assistance in the past to try to better streamline the process when these decisions are made, to be able to get them out faster in a more streamlined way.
Well, I'm all for that for government, and I'm sure this committee would also be for it. So if you have any recommendations, let us know.
Happy to. Thank you so much.
Do you yield back, Mr. Rubersberger?
Back.
Say it again.
Yeah, yield back.
Mr. Fleischman, do you have any additional questions?
Madam Chair, no, thank you. And Doctor, thank you for your testimony before us today. I yield back. Thank you.
If there are no more questions, I will conclude today's hearing. Director Jadu, thank you very much for your time and for helping us think through the many challenges that you have. The Subcommittee on Homeland Security stands adjourned.